What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome into another episode of the Johnny's Report, where we are back here on this late Saturday evening as we just wrapped up a little college football, as it's that time of the year. We're into the colder weather starting. Well, today was actually pretty humid, so this might be a bad example tonight at least. But we're starting to get around to that colder weather time. It's football weather, but as we know, with it being football season, it soon will be basketball season, and specifically college basketball season. So, tonight on this episode, we are going to be discussing possible home and home matchups for St. John's on the Johnny's Report. Yeah, St. John's listen, they've got options at the table. With Rick Pitino as their head coach, there are numerous avenues they can go down. We can go down to Tobacco Road into the ACC. We can go into the SEC. There's even an American athletic team that I'll get to in a moment. There's a lot of stuff that St. John's can really get creative with here. And I think there are two schools that I'm sure you saw in the thumbnail that we'll have to start off with, and that's Louisville and Kentucky. Now, Louisville, I'll start off with them. And actually, let me preface here with Kentucky. I know we're going to be down in Atlanta facing Kentucky, but it's not a home and home series. I mean, when it comes to scheduling a real, let's say, rivalry matchup or a former rivalry matchup, and just scheduling a team in general, it's always fun to have the home and homes. It's always fun to be able to go into enemy territory, whether it's Kentucky coming up to MSG or whether it's St. John's going out to Rupp. It is going to be an electric atmosphere. And, I look so much further beyond the fact that Rick Pitino once coached at Kentucky. I honestly just think it'd be cool to see him coach against Mark Pope and see how that goes. I thought that, watching him and Richard Pitino last year, and I understand the fact that it's, of course, father-son, and I'm not sure if Rick Pitino necessarily has that father-son kind of relationship with Mark Pope, but I still think it'd be kind of cool to see how the two head coaches now, how, the student tries to emulate the master, or if there's really two different sides of the coin there. I mean, I watched a decent amount of Kentucky games last year. Watched Pope a little bit at BYU, but when he was at Kentucky last season, there was just something to turning on a Kentucky game and, seeing how that team came together. And there was a significant difference from watching Coach Calipari years prior to watching Mark Pope. It felt more defensive minded. It felt way more like you were watching something similar to what basketball purists want to see, and something similar to watching head coach Rick Pitino and how he coaches. Now, of course, there are going to be differences, but I definitely felt like it was a little bit more demanding, actually a lot more demanding than what we had seen in years prior out of Kentucky. And it definitely felt like he was really trying to hone in on the little things, something that obviously we know Coach Pitino holds near and dear. So, yeah, I think a home and home with Kentucky, I mean, that would just be an awesome atmosphere. Could you imagine Madison Square Garden going out to Rupp Arena? Just anytime they could make that happen with Rick Pitino's tenure at St. John's, I think it'd be really cool. And listen, I think there's in the St. John's athletics, and I think the higher ups, they may feel a little weary about scheduling that game. At least I would tend to think they may feel a little weary about scheduling that game, just because maybe not sure how the fans would take it if he goes down to Kentucky and gets, you know, a raucous amount of cheers from the Kentucky fans, or whether, hey, I mean, listen, St. John's is wearing red. They may boo. They hate the color red. We'll get to that in a moment. But I really think that may be a reason as to why they wouldn't do it. But regardless, I still think, in my opinion, they should schedule that game. Now, next we'll talk about that team in red, the Louisville Cardinals. So I want to start off with this. So obviously, as you can tell, I'm in my early 20s. When I think about Rick Pitino coaching, I think about him coaching the Louisville Cardinals. Got to go to Freedom Hall many times as a kid. Not for basketball, actually for something in the equestrian area, which is a conversation for a different day, or a story for a different day, rather. But got to see the 2013 NCAA championship trophy. And there were so many, cool memories of the Louisville basketball, obvious, um, shall I say, mantra of stepping into that arena. So I always associated him with being the head coach at Louisville. And listen, full disclosure, I cannot stand Kentucky basketball. I'm going to draw no favors with Cats fans saying that. I did root for Louisville. I'm sorry, I did. Listen, I got a Louisville sweatshirt somewhere hanging around here from back in the day. That's just who I, pulled for between the two teams, if they were going head to head. Now, with that being said, of course, there's a lot of bad blood there between Rick Pitino and Louisville. I'm not going to necessarily get into all that, but part of the reason why I think it would be kind of cool for him to coach against his former team is, listen, and obviously they'd have to schedule Boston University as well, but I think it would be cool because let's face it, if we're putting all the cards on the table here, St. John's may very well be Rick Pitino's last stop. It's kind of grew up in New York. It would be, in my opinion, as we've talked about here on this podcast, especially if you were listening back when it was the 526 podcast, it's a full circle moment for him to try and rebuild the team, rebuild the program where he grew up. I mean, within 30 minutes from. And I really think, with that being said, if he's going to then have a farewell tour and you're going to Kentucky, obviously we see Providence. So we've done that. We checked that off the box. Unfortunately, we can't play the Celtics or the Knicks. I don't think we could play the team he coached over in Greece. Like I said, you'd have to schedule Boston U too, but scheduling Louisville would be pretty neat. Now, it wouldn't have to be a home and home, although for the topic of conversation here on this podcast, maybe we should make it a home and home, but at least maybe come to MSG if he doesn't want to step foot in Louisville. I just think it would be cool to see that happen. And if he did step foot in Louisville, what an atmosphere that would be. Could you imagine the New York fans, the St. John's diehards in Louisville at the KFC Yum Center, and they're berating Pitino with boos, with cheers? Could you imagine the Johnny's fans and how they would react to their head coach? I mean, the Twitter wars would be going crazy. The wars in the stands would be going crazy. So I think that'd be pretty cool as well. But moving off of the Louisville Kentucky rivalry, let's go to some older rivals. I had the privilege of covering the Empire Classic in 2018. Oh, I'm sorry, not 2018. Jeez. 2022. 2022 at the Barclays Center, and it was St. John's versus Syracuse. And you heard stories about the old Big E, especially if you go to a Big E school nowadays. I'm sure basketball junkies at Villanova, maybe UConn can even, probably UConn too, can attest to this as well. The way the old Big East was, with how the rivalries were, tough and ground and pound, and you would, when you turn on a TV and you instantly knew within 5 seconds you were watching a Big East game. I think it would be neat to see St. John's and Syracuse square off. And this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Rick Pitino. It's just, let's face it. One program is definitely up here, like in terms of trending upwards. And the other programs, Syracuse has had some down years. Let's be honest here. They have. So I think it would be kind of neat to see the two fan bases clash. If both programs were good at the same time, I think it'd be even better. But personally, if you had to say Kentucky, Louisville, I'm putting those top two, and then I'm putting Syracuse right underneath. Next, got to go with the Duke Blue Devils. I think Duke would be just because of, the great battles St. John's and Duke they've had over the years. I mean, not many people I think realize it from the national scale, but St. John's has held their own against Duke at times. Some great upsets over the years. Obviously, the most recent being back in 2018. I think it would be a real neat experience to have those two go head to head. Now, I'm going to throw two other schools out there, both because of the head coaching pedigree. One, Kansas. We faced Kansas a couple years ago. Unfortunately, had the privilege to attend that game as a fan, and it didn't go too well. We got killed, and it wasn't very fun being out on Hempstead and seeing St. John's just get blown to bits at the new Islanders arena. Unfortunately, the UBS arena, the name was escaping me there for a second. Really neat, kind of. I know the game against Hofstra a couple years ago. Obviously, it's Hofstra. I don't know how much we were really going to draw between the two colleges in terms of meeting together at a hockey arena, but we were able to. That Kansas game was pretty cool. I remember the atmosphere being pretty neat. Plus, you're playing Kansas. I mean, there was something to seeing Kansas win the national championship game that year and be like, wow, I can't believe I actually got to see St. John's play these guys. It was really cool. Now maybe we could play them and we could look like we actually belong on the court with the Kansas Jayhawks. But I think the Bill Self, Rick Pitino matchup would be really neat. And I think that's something that college basketball would really like, and I think we would really need. But I'm going to go next up with Gonzaga. Small Catholic colleges, something about it. Those two meeting up. I think that would potentially be a cool idea between the two schools, Mark Few and Rick Pitino going head to head. I something about that, just it's such a weird matchup, but because the two head coaches, I think it would be pretty cool. So I'll go with Gonzaga as well. And then the final one, got to do it. I know this is going to stem and draw some unfortunate emotions from what happened a couple months ago. But St. John's, Arkansas, we got to make it happen again. Coach Cal versus Rick Pitino, two rivals. I think it would just, because here's the thing between the two of them. It's oil and water. They just, two completely different styles. Both of them are cunning, but they're not in the same way. And it's like a weird way to describe to people. Rick Pitino is very New York. Cal is very, I don't know what. I mean, he's from Pittsburgh. Feels like he could be from New York, but I don't know. He just doesn't ring Pittsburgh to me. He rings like Midwest. I don't know why. I mean, Pittsburgh's basically in the Midwest, but that's neither here nor there. We're not going to get into a geographical debate. But anyways, folks, that's going to do it for me on this episode of the Johnny's Report. We'll be back on soon as we're getting closer and closer to tip off to open up the 2025-2026 season. Let me know in the comments. Leave a like. Follow at Big East Energy and at the Johnny's Report. Again, let me know what you think. Who would you like to see St. John's play? Let me know if you agree with it's either be any of the teams I've mentioned or if you have any other cool, interesting ideas in mind. Thanks for tuning in. And as always, I'll talk to you next time.